Hello, fertile souls. Welcome, 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 welcome to and welcome back to Omolayo Fertility TV. This is a channel dedicated to unlocking the secrets of preconception so that people, individuals, couples like you can get and stay pregnant and grow the family of your dreams. What we want to do is unlock the secrets behind what it requires to prepare ourselves, preparing ourselves spiritually, emotionally, physically, for the miracle of pregnancy, for the miracle of childbirth. I'm Dr. Abigail. I'm your host. I'm your fertility coach on this channel. I'm a naturopathic doctor. I'm a midwife. And this is the fourth video in our 5-part fertility series, the 5 foundational factors of fertility that your doctor is not talking to you about. This video, we're going to be talking about the ancestral factors. But as a brief reminder, what are those 5 foundational factors that are impacting your fertility? Well, of course, you've got number 1, that physical factor. That's usually the things that you're already discussing with your doctor, the things that we tend to know about medically speaking that are impacting our fertility, our blood work, our sleep, our diet, our exercise, the things in our physical bodies, right? Number 2, emotional. What are those emotional things? What are those thoughts, those moods, those feelings, those things in our emotional realm that are impacting, and how might they be impacting our fertility, our physical fertility? Third, spiritual. We discussed in the third video what are the spiritual things that are impacting your fertility and how to think about those things and what to do about those spiritual factors, right? And now we're going into our fourth one, which is the ancestral, your bloodline, your family history, your genetics, all of those things. We'll unpack that a little bit more. And then the fifth part of this 5-part series will be the transformational actions that you can take about these other realms, in these other realms, within these other realms that are impacting your fertility. So, before we launch into the ancestral pieces, I want to remind you again about the way the human organism, this divine thing that we are, operates. We are tripartite beings, 3 parts really. We have a spirit, a soul, and a body. The spirit is the light and the dark, the angels and the demons, if you will, the spiritual realm. It's a universal principles in that realm that impacts everything. It is the source of everything else. I like to say that everything is spiritual. Everything that's happening in the physical is a manifestation of something else that's going on in the spiritual realm. Then the second part of this tripartite thing that we are, these tripartite beings that we are, is the soul. And the soul encompasses our mind, our will, and our emotions. So the soul itself is really deep. And this is where a lot of therapy and emotional work happens. So you've got spiritual work, you've got emotional soul work, and then you've got the third part of our tripartite being, which is our body, our physical bodies, the things that we can touch and feel, our senses, what we see, what we taste, what we smell, what we in addition feel. Now, even though I'm teasing these things out in the 5 parts that are impacting your fertility or this tripartite beings, the way we actually work as human beings, there's a really thin line, fine line, and really no line. It blends into each other. It's important to understand how these distinct realms operate, but also understand that they all operate in harmony, in synchronicity with each other. And there are hidden rules behind how our bodies function, and it's in our best interest to pay attention. So even though we may be having symptoms and signs on the physical realm, it might be coming from a root that's in one of these other places. So understand how to pay attention to how our bodies work and the things that our bodies are saying, how our bodies are speaking to us to let us know what we can do and where we can focus our work to bring about our changes. Today, we're going to focus on our bloodline. We're going to focus on our generational bloodline. We're going to focus on our family inheritance. It's important to know that the impact of your ancestry, your lineage, your bloodline has a direct and or indirect, but it has an impact on your life. and by impacting your life, by extension, your fertility, correct? So, what comes to mind when you think about bloodline, family, genes, genetics, right? Family history, when you're thinking about, talking about to a doctor and fertility, all of that medical thing. We tend to think about family history, from a medical perspective, but what about other perspectives? What about the things that are happening in your family ancestry, your lineage, your history? What's the legacy? What are those patterns that you notice in your family line? What are those mannerisms? What are those tendencies? All the women in my family tend to do this. All the mothers, the grandmothers, the aunties, they operate like that, or this happens to them. Sure, with medical diagnoses, but also what about socially? All the men, all of the fathers, all of the uncles, all of my brothers, all of the men in the family, if you think about it, do this or experienced that. What are those patterns? Think about it. Were they all great business people? Were they all scholars? Were they all cheats? Were they all alcoholics? Were they all liars? Were they abused or abusers? Were they all wealthy? Were they all poor? Were they cunning and witty? Were they all beautiful? Were they all plain? Were they happily married? Never married? Frequently divorced? What are these patterns? Were they all nurturers? Were they loners? Think about it. What are the things that, we tend to notice but not really notice that are showing up in our families? These things matter. When we think about ancestry, when we think about legacy, sometimes we talk about it as generational blessings, generational curses. These generational hand me downs are handed down, and we will hand them down in various realms of our lives. It can be medically, it can be socially, personality, good, bad, or otherwise. They are packaged and they are handed down. So, finding out more about your family and your family history and your lineage can truly be an eye opening experience in all of these different realms, right? Uh, there are studies that let us know that learning about your family history can actually have a positive impact. We have all of these now laboratories that are looking into genetics and ancestry from other perspectives. We have inheritance wills that categorize and document what is to be passed down tangibly. We have genetics that document in our cells, in our bodies, what gets passed down in our cells. So we can think about these in a lot of different ways. There's epigenetics. There are ways that we can override what's actually showing up in our genes and change what we're going to be passing on down the line. And what's really interesting about the ancestral piece of this conversation that we're having is that the ancestral packages that we receive and that we're going to pass down also show up in these different realms. It shows up in our emotions. There are emotional packages that we receive. Some people have a line of depression or joy that is passed on from generation to generation, or it can show up in the spiritual realm. There are attacks, demons, or blessings, angels that are passed down from generation to generation that we see in our bloodline. It can show up in our physical realm, and we know about this with family history. Oh, hypertension, diabetes, cancer, different kind of things that are showing up in our cells that can be passed on. Okay, so while we are not responsible for what is passed on to us, down to us, we are empowered to not pass down or to be selective about what we pass on to our generations. Okay. And so we'll talk about that and the transformational actions that you can take within your generational aspect. And of course, in video 5, when we're talking about all of the transformational actions that you can take to impact your fertility, especially in those intangible areas. And what we want to do is understand that the spiritual laws and principles that we learned about in the spiritual aspect and conversation also show up in this ancestral conversation. The emotional principles that we learned also show up in the ancestral, as well as what we see in our physical shows up in our ancestral lines, right? So no matter how your life is panning out right now, it is a result, directly or indirectly, of the foundations that your ancestors have set up for you. Okay. And there are ways that we can work with what we have and transform what we have so that we can pass on something different to our progeny, to our future generations, right? Keep in mind that whatever is not transformed is transferred onto the next generation. We don't die with it. It's passed along to the next generation. It didn't die with our ancestors, it was passed along to us. So it behooves us to understand these things and know what to do with them. Do you understand this? The deeds of the parents, good, bad, or otherwise, falls upon and speaks to the destiny of the child, of the children. If we are the parents, our deeds, good, bad, or otherwise, falls upon and speaks to the destiny of our children and great grandchildren until they shift and do something with it. So, again, we're going to talk about and equip ourselves to knowing what to do and how to deal with generational angels and demons. People die, but the spirits don't die. Angels and demons don't die. So our traits, those characteristics, those symptoms show up and tell us of something else that's going on. So we can talk about the examples that we shared, for instance, tumors, cancers, drinking, incest, lying, barrenness, fertility or fruitfulness, divorces, hypertension, cancers, diabetes, all these different traits that we might be mindful of if it's so abundant, or not pay as much attention to because it's hidden in the background. But it's in our best interest to know what we're facing and what we're fighting, so that even if it didn't start with you, it may have been 500 years or 5,000 years ago that this is it, but you can do things to ensure that it ends with you. So I want us to have an "it ends with me" mentality, especially with those things that we do not like that are passed down to us. Those things that we don't understand. Hey, why is I'm doing everything right in all of these other areas? What's going on? It might be in the spiritual, emotional, or ancestral realm that we're not peeling behind the layers enough to understand what actually is impacting our lives. Okay. I'll leave you with an analogy. Buying a house. Let's say you buy a house, and in the house, the house has a lawn, and in the lawn there are weeds in that front lawn, and it was passed down to you by the previous owner. You're not responsible for the weeds that was in the lawn of the home that your parents passed on to you, but you can't just mow the lawn. When you mow the lawn, those weeds are still in there. You have to exterminate the weeds. You've got to pull it out. You've got to root it out and exterminate it so that those weeds don't keep popping back up. Okay. So we want to also make sure that we take care of that lawn, pull out those weeds and exterminate those weeds so that when we pass that house onto our children, they don't have to deal with those ugly weeds. They can just deal with the beautiful grass, right? So let's be mindful of the inheritance that we pass on and transfer onto our children. And in order to do that, also involves us being mindful of the inheritance that was transferred and passed on to us. The goal is not to shift the blame, but to shift the responsibility to deal with those things in our bloodline. And we have authority to do so, right? And your authority trumps the access that those weeds had to your lawn. You have the authority to uproot those, to weed them out, to plant new things of growth and fertility in your lawn. So, how do we do that? How do we transform this? There are a few tools, strategies to keep in mind, and it starts, like as I mentioned just a moment ago, with an "it ends with me" mentality. Okay, so if you or someone like I was finding myself wondering, why aren't things working out? why am I not excelling in the way that I know I should be? Because I've been doing all of these things, but that prosperity that I expect is not showing up. Think about it led me to think about the covenants that my ancestors made that were impacting me, though I did not make that covenant myself. And my work was to be aware of those covenants, and even those things that I wasn't aware of, break them, because I was being provided with the awareness of the fruit of the covenant. I wasn't aware of the covenant. I don't know what they did, right? But I was aware of the fruit of it, not progress, not uh, prospering in ways that I expected based on the actions that I was taking. Well, there's something deeper here. I did my work in the emotional realm. We did it in the spiritual realm. Well, then what else is there? What was on my bloodline that needed to be exposed? Even without knowing, we can do the work in the spirit realm to to deal with those seeds, those weeds, if you will, that are crowding out the progress, right? Oftentimes, I just want to make a little point about silence, excuses, burying things because of perceived shame, that whole idea of not airing out dirty laundry of our family, right? Oh, let's not upset people. Well, it happened in the past. Well, I didn't do it, or it didn't happen to me directly. I want you to be very mindful of those excuses and the pitfall of that type of silence and burying away, because it doesn't do anything to it's equivalent to the metaphorical mowing of the lawn without uprooting the weeds of it. Okay, so as we talked about with the spiritual realm, where there's light and darkness, you need to shine that light into those areas, those dark areas, in order to expose what is there and then deal with what is there. Just leaving it in the attic, leaving it in the basement, doesn't actually deal with what's there. And that leaving it allows it to remain stagnant and fester and turn into other things that we don't want. And again, what is not transformed is transferred on, even if we, as our physical beings, die and move on, it then gets transferred on in other ways. So it is in our best interest to be able to be mindful of the strategies and the tools to to deal with these things. That said, don't bring a knife to a gunfight. Spiritual things are dealt with spiritual tools. Physical things are dealt with physical tools. Emotional soul things are dealt with emotional soul tools. Okay? You don't fight generational curses with pills or therapy or just increased discipline. Generational curses are a mixture, but are housed, again, everything is spiritual, are foundational in that spiritual realm. But it can seep into the emotional, it can seep into the soul, and then of course seep into the physical. So your tools may be in all of that, but do not forget or do not house all of the things that you do in just one realm. Be mindful of it. So pay attention to the fruit. And you don't need a PhD in demonology to know that there might be some demons or something's not quite right here, right? You don't have to know exactly what was done at an altar, what kind of covenant, what kind of deeds were done before you to know that it looks like this smells of this. What might this be? How do I put on this garment for spiritual warfare to understand and uproot what was planted in that spiritual lawn, if that makes any sense to those of you who are listening deeply here. Okay. And the reason it's important to do that is because if not, those same weeds will show up down the line. If not you, then the future progeny. And so do that battle now for yourself and for your future selves. So we can do that by minding what's in our thoughts. We want to fill our mind with the truth, the divine vision of what we know is true. Because whatever you fill your mind with becomes your mindset. Your mindset is so important, and you want to align yourself with that inner self talk, those victorious thoughts that you have put in place, because then it is a matter of time before that becomes the reality. So the mental state must change. The way you talk must change. The way you see yourself must change. It has to change. Otherwise, you risk hindering the very transformation in your life that you are seeking to have. Okay? In addition to minding our thoughts and our mind and our words, there's fear and faith, two sides of one coin, right? And faith doesn't just show up and stay by herself. She needs to be assisted. And fear isn't just going to up and go away and stay away by himself. He needs to be resisted. So while you maintain faith, assist the faith. That's where you have your thoughts, you're changing who you're around, continuing to believe it, even in spite of not seeing it. And then the fear, resisting that, again, eliminating those things, removing those things so that what you're creating around you reinforces what you are putting in place. And I love this thing that I heard: learn to eat in the presence of your enemies, not just the haters, enemies, your glow up is happening in the face of your enemies and your haters. It's also eating in the presence of your enemies, those negative thoughts, how to continue to feed yourself positive mindset in the face of negative thoughts, so that this drowns out and this increases, right? So, what are some tangible things that you can do? We talked about the strategies. Well, you want to, if if you have the means, go and talk to your parents. Ask some questions. Ask about what uncle so and so and auntie so and so and grandmama and grandpapa and all of the people in your family bloodline, what was going on with them? What are those things that your family didn't really talk about that was going on within your family? Shoot, if you need to, talk to some neighbors, talk to that outcast in the family that's going to really tell you what was happening. Okay? Pray about those things that you don't know. Pay attention to your dreams. Pay attention to the fruit in your life and what that is an indication of. And then do the spiritual soul work to break and release those bloodline curses off of your life. And then do the spiritual soul work to bring in the support and more of those bloodline blessings into your life. Okay. And then, last but not least, make plans to share what you have learned with your children. Okay. And with your siblings and with your friends so that they can do this work on their own as well. So that's it for now. Hopefully, you've learned a few things about how and why ancestral bloodline lineage, what it is, how it shows up, not just physically, also emotionally and spiritually, how to identify different fruit of the bloodline things